Hi everyone, it's Lolita and this is the demo video for our color matching and watercolor techniques exercise. I hope you enjoy and learn something. We're going to start this watercolor technique and color matching exercise by taping off six or seven different rectangles on your paper. And what I'm working with here is artist tape, and you can use either artist tape or you can use masking tape. The difference is that with artist tape, it has a non-acidic adhesive, and masking tape has acid in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take this tape and I'm just going to line it right up with the edge of my paper, and that is what I am going to use as the edges of my rectangles. And so I'm just taping that tape down to the paper. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn that over and I'm going to tape the tape onto itself. So this way it gives me a nice little tab that I can pull off. Because if I tape it to the paper, I'm going to have a hard time, if not make it impossible for myself to pull that off. So I'm just going to turn that over and tape the tape onto itself. So this way I can remove it easily when I'm finished with my painting here and with my painting exercise. And I'm just going to do the same thing on the opposite side and tape that right up to the edge. And just because we're doing random, for the most part we're doing randomly sized rectangles, that's why I'm just not being incredibly careful about making any distinct or specific measurements like we've done with our charts in the past. So again, just turning that over and letting the tape onto itself, so this way I'm going to be able to easily remove it from the paper. And then I'm going to do the same thing for these sides, but this time I'm not going to have to worry about that because I'm going to be taping the tape right onto the other tape, so it'll just easily remove that way. And this is about a 3/4 inch tape, so that's going to be the distance between all of my rectangles, because I'm just going to use the tape to define the boundaries of my rectangles. So I'm taping the top edge of this side as well, and again just taping that tape right down onto the tape so I don't have to worry about how difficult it will be to remove. And then I'm just going to use this entire area here for my 7-color color matching exercise. And like I mentioned in the exercise, this should be by about 2 inches. So I'm just going to put a piece of tape about 2 inches out, and that gives me approximately a 9 by 2 inch rectangle, and that's going to allow me enough space to do the 7 swatches that I have to do for the color mixing exercise. It'll allow you enough room for that. And then what you want to do is, now we're going to just do some random placements of the tape to tape off 6 different areas of the paper, to have 6 little rectangles, or maybe 5 more rectangles. And in addition to taping off about 5 to 6 rectangles over here, what you want to do is divide this into about 7 equal sections. And if I look through here, and if I were to go about in here, that's about halfway through. So I'm going to go about from here to here, and I think that's about how big each of my sections will be. And that's one, and I'll have about 3 of them. So I can make them a little bigger, about 3 of them down here. And about 3 up here. And so then that gives me these areas for 7 different tones, or rather colors that I'm going to paint in there. And I'm going to be doing choosing a color from the exercise, and this is the color strip that I chose to match. And let's get this turned back this direction. And so that means in this top rectangle, I'm going to paint this color. In this second, I'm going to paint the second color, and so on till I color match all the way down to this dark blue, which means I'll be mixing maybe one of these blues and probably mute it, add some white, either that or use the white of the paper to make a tint there. And I'm going to color match all 7 of these colors into those and paint them into the little rectangles down here. Now we're going to do the rest of the paper is going to be where we're going to practice 2 techniques of watercolor. We're going to do at least 2 rectangles. We're going to paint them with the wet into dry technique, and that's what you'll be painting these into. You'll be using the wet into dry, which just basically means, again, that you'll be using the wet media, the watercolor, and painting it onto a dry surface, the paper. And then 2 of the rectangles that we're going to paint in, we're going to use the wet into wet technique, which means we're going to wet 2 of the rectangles and paint those in while they're wet. So I'm going to tape my paper off, and I'm going to tape off a fairly nice size section, because over the wet into wet technique, we're going to do just a little painting over the wet into wet. I guess I'm splitting it in half, kind of what I've got left. And again, taping onto that tape. And on this one, I'm going to split this particular section. I'm just going to tape down the middle of it. And again, just taping tape onto tape, so this way it makes it easy to remove. And maybe I'll just go all the way through, and then I'm going to subdivide those into a couple of rectangles. Uh-oh. I didn't tape all the way. I'm going to just move this over just a little. This tape does remove fairly easily because it is meant to do that. So I'm just making sure that it covers all the way, so I have my nice little borders of my rectangles, or in this case they almost look like squares, taped off. And then I'm going to tape through these and do some little skinny rectangles here. And so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rectangles. And I think that's all I'm going to do. So the first thing I want to do here is we're going to work that wet into dry technique. And let me label these. So these are going to be for color matching. And that's what these 7, so that's going to be 7 color matching swatches. 7 color match. And then these are going to be wet into dry. And then these are going to be wet into wet. wet into wet. We're gonna do one wet into wet where we're gonna do washes here, and we're gonna do a multicolor, and we're going to do a one color. And we're going to do that and try to do a one color gradient. And this is going to be a multicolor gradient. And the wet into dries, we're just going to do washes, and we're not going to worry about whether or not they're going to be gradients or not. Think of using an analogous palette for one or two of them, because when we go to do our exercise for this, we are going to be using an analogous palette, and we're going to be using a split complementary. And so do at least one of your rectangles with an analogous color scheme, and do at least one of your rectangles with a split complementary scheme. Now, an analogous color scheme is any three colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. And so that would be where it would be blue, violet, blue, or blue-green, or blue-green, green, and yellow-green, or even yellow, yellow-green, and green. Those would be an analogous color palette. A split complementary palette is one where it's a lot like a complementary, except this time you would look at one of the main colors. You would choose any color on the color wheel, and to get a split complementary, you would go across, and instead of using the color directly across from the color on the color wheel, you use the two colors that are next to it on the color wheel, and that is a split complementary. Now, with this particular exercise, it's going to be okay to use any variation of these analogous colors, and it's going to be okay to do that in your exercise as well. It's going to be okay to use any variation of these colors. So you can use mutes or tones or shades or tints or even neutrals of the colors when you're creating your analogous color palette. So let's just look at this first color. I'm just going to go ahead and make it as big as I can on my phone, and then try to do a little color matching. And what I'm looking at already is it looks like it is tending towards like a little bit of this blue. This might be a little bit too bright initially, and I'm going to put a little bit of this blue in, mix that in. So I'm mixing a couple blues, and then we know in order to mute a blue, we can put a little bit of orange in. So I'm just taking a little bit of orange from the top of this pan here and adding that in. It looks like that is definitely way too much orange. So we know we're gonna have to go with a lot more blue, add a lot more blue back into that. And that's starting to look like a blue-green. I think I'm gonna add a little bit of this ultramarine into it, so that way it takes it back, and that's definitely too dark and too saturated. I'm gonna add a little bit of this blue into my little mixture here. And let's see what happens if I take a little bit of white and mix that in over here. This still looks like it is a little too dark, and it could use a little bit more blue in it. So I'm going to go back into this blue and add a little bit more of that blue in. And let's see what happens if I put a little bit of white into this. So that feels like I'm getting close to that first color on my color matching exercise. So I'm going to paint that in this video, and you guys are going to do all 7 colors, but for the demo video I'm not going to do all 7 colors. I'm just going to do the top rectangle and paint that value, that color, right into that top rectangle. And you see, the fun part about having tape on your paper is that you can paint right into the tape and drag that paint like right over into the tape, and then you're going to get these nice crisp little borders, boundaries. I've got too much paint piling up over here in the corner, so I'm just taking my brush and lifting some of that. So again, I probably could have done a much better job of getting a nice uniform value here. So I'm just taking water and watering this entire area down all over again, and it feels like that's a closer match to the blue I was looking for. I'm just going to go here with my semi-damp brush and pick up some of that excess paint that's piling up at the edges of my rectangle. And that's a match for my first color matching. And again, you're going to go and match all 7. I'm not going to do that on the video, but I will do it just the top one. And now with the wet into dry, again, you're going to do that same type of technique, and on one of them you're going to use an analogous palette. So for me, I might use a little bit of blue, a little bit of maybe this green, and take just a little bit more of that, and a little bit of purple. And I think I'm going to use those colors for my, stuck it in the wrong well, so that's okay. And I think I'm going to use these 3 colors for my analogous palette, and just play around with that general idea of having a 3 colors and seeing how they work together, and using the wet into dry technique. And I think what I want to do is I want to dull down this green just a little bit. So I'm just going to just barely take a little bit of red and put just a little bit out and mix that in. And I've got my green dulled down just a little, muted down, and I'm going to use that green, and then I think I'm going to just water down my blue just a little more and get myself a tint of a blue going on over here. And then I think I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of black into my purple, so I have a deeper purple. And that's the analogous palette I'm going to play with in one of my rectangles here. And I'm just going to start at one end of my rectangle and do a nice wash that has a couple different colors that are analogous colors mixed into it. And I'm going to put this down here and even play with the value as I move it across the paper. Allow it to do its own thing in terms of value, because I'm just playing here. And then I'm going to take this edge and just allow it to blend into that blue and allow them to diffuse into each other, and then go in on this corner and decide this is where I'm going to paint the lavender little mixture that I've pulled out, and paint that right up to the edge of the rectangle. Paint right onto the tape. And I'm not going to even worry about having this a little bit of the mixture in there, and just paint that on and see how that works out. Even allow some of this paint to just mix into that blue and diffuse that, and diffuse those two edges together, even the purple and the green. And I'm not trying to make an image, I'm just playing with color. So that if I was to paint another one where I do at least another one where I do a split complementary palette, let's just say I'm going to use purple again, but now I'm just going to use an orange and a little bit of a yellow, because if I go with purple, I'm going to use a yellow orange and a yellow green, and just mix up some variation of those. And I've got my lavender set out, and then I'm going to go with a split complementary of an yellow orange and a yellow green. So I'm just going to mix those colors up real quick and set out some, that's almost yellow orange, and I'm going to make it just a little bit more yellow orange with this color next to it, and mix that in, and I'm going to be fairly happy with that. So I've got two of my split complementary colors, and now the only other one I need is a yellow green. So I'm just going to mix that yellow green up. If I said I was going to mix up a green, I apparently lied, and I meant I was going to mix up the yellow orange. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that yellow and put it in over here, and I could actually mix it right, some of this blue right into it, and not necessarily even have to dip into my yellow greens at all, because I've got this blue sitting here on my palette, so that makes a lovely yellow green. So again, just going in and painting something random with what I've concocted in terms of colors in my palette. So painting that, but I am definitely going to paint up right to the edge of the tape. Just painting a nice little abstract of colors and of multiple colors. Then I'm going to just go in with some orange and that nice yellow orange. Put that down. Maybe still a little extra yellow from that direction, and take that and put it right into that green edge. And I'm using the full body of the brush just to move that paint around. And again, I'm just having a nice little time playing here and using the last of my 3-color combination and completing my split complementary little color rectangle, and seeing how those colors work together. And this will give me an idea of what colors I may or may not want to work with when we get to doing the project and I have to use a split complementary and an analogous color palette. I might play around with colors just so I have an idea of what direction I want to go with those. And now with the wet into wet, what we're going to do is we're going to do one with where it is a 1-color wash, and that's where we're going to do a color gradient. And I'm just going to brush clean water across this entire space. And I don't want to make it too wet. You want to look, and if you've got any kind of water running or dripping on your page or pooled up, then that's too much water, and you want to just either sop that up with a paper towel or with a dry brush. And again, you want to look at it physically from the side and make sure you don't have these pools of water, because you just want this to have a damp quality to it, but not out of control where the water is just running all over your page, because that'll just make a mess. So then you wet that, and we'll do a one color wash. And for the sake of just having fun and playing around, I'm gonna do my one color wash. I'm just gonna add some of this blue into this blue-green mix. And I'm just gonna do this turquoise wash in the background just because I've got the paint convenient. You can make yours any color that you would like. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just start with all of this paint that I've got loaded in my brush. And I'm going to move this, start and at the top of my rectangle, and just keep painting in that same direction the entire, all right, this got a little dry on me. The entire distance of the rectangle. And because mine got a little dry, I'm going to go back in and load the bottom half with just a little bit of extra water and let that wash, have that nice gradient that way. And it's just because of, based on the amount of paint and the wetness of my paper, I get a nice gradient. And you can make that gradient any color that you want. So this one is going to be a multicolor gradient, and again, I'm just using paints that I have out already for the sake of ease. And I'm going to do I guess I better do the wet into wet part. And this is also going to be a wet into wet. And on this one, again, we're going to wet that surface just with a clean, wet brush. And I'm going to go ahead and let that soak in just a little while. And just let those fibers, let it soak down into the fibers just a little longer this time, to almost like precondition the paper. And still I want to make sure I don't have too much water and let that get out of control. So I do have some areas where the water is piling up. I'm going to remove that. And I've got a nice semi-gloss to the area. And so I'm just going to go in with a couple different colors in here. And I've got all of these colors set out. So I'm just going to use these for convenience sake. And go in and apply some of this yellow up to in this corner here, and then I'm just going to take some of this orange and blend that in right below it, and just make a multicolor gradient, clean my brush off, and then I think I'm going to take some of this yellow and put it down in this corner. I want it to be a little bit stronger, so I'm just refreshing my little mixture here and doing a slightly stronger version of yellow here in the corner. And I'm gonna wash that out. And then I'm gonna do a little bit of this green towards the middle and just let that settle in and let the wet into wet nature of the project just take the paint and let it do its thing. And then I'm going to just put some purple down in this area. And that's covered that entire little rectangle. And that's how you're going to get started on this project. In the next video, I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with the two wet into wet, because we're going to do another passage on the wet into wet on both of them, and we're going to pass over these again with a more saturated version of the colors we've already gone to get the, or not necessarily a more saturated, but the second passage will get it more saturated. And then we're going to let it dry again, and then we will go back in and do some wet into dry painting on top of these washes here that we've created. And if you want to do that into the wet into dry ones, you can also do that. And then you can just paint your third wet into dry rectangle however you want. Just, you know, feel free to be as creative as you like. Make sure you go from edge to edge and do some sort of wash though. All right, so I will see you and we will finish this up in the next video. So I've placed this still photo of my chart here so you can see what exactly it looks like labeled and what we're doing for each of the rectangles we're creating. I will have more of this painted and we will see you in the next video and show you where to go with the rest of this exercise.